Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jason Bahamundi. I'm one of the owners of Run Try Bike, and this is our Fireside Chats, which we have at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Today, we're going to be joined by Haleigh Fisher of Trailhead DFW, formerly Grapevine Wellness Center. She'll be joining us here in a few minutes. We're going to be talking about sports psychology, everything from eating disorders to thinking about how you handle the summer now that it's getting super hot. Today's the longest day of the year. So we're going to be discussing dealing with summer weather and how that is going to impact you and how you deal with that mentally. We'll discuss some new mom type information, right, in terms of the mental aspect, sports psychology of it all. So we'll have a fun chat with Haleigh. She'll be joining us here in a moment. A couple of notes. We are proud to be partnered with She Strong and the Monarch Triathlon. So for those of you who are racing triathlon, the Monarch Triathlon will take place October 22nd, 2022 in Kingman, Arizona. You can find information on our website under the events tab, and you can also find information about Idaho Running Day, which is being put on by Boise, which will have a 5K, 10K, half marathon, and full marathon, which is a BQ event, which I think has about 410 feet of elevation gain over the course of the 26 miles. So check them out if you're looking to BQ. That event will take place on September 17th. Last but not least, Blue 70 has a discount code for you, RTB15, to get 15% off accessories, including backpacks and goggles and swim caps and the like. And so thank you, Haleigh Fisher, for joining us. Haleigh Fisher of Trailhead DFW. Appreciate you joining us today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Perfect. So, by the way, folks, Om Gandhi, who is our social media manager, is making his way to Iceland to trek across the country. So we're super excited for him, which means he won't be here to moderate for us today. So if you have questions for Haleigh, just click the little question mark in the bottom right-hand corner, and we'll make sure that we get to them during the conversation and have her answer them for you. So without further ado, Haleigh, today is the longest day of the year as we enter summer, and I know almost every part of the country is already dealing with high temperatures and heat and stuff like that. So want to get your take on tips that you can provide to athletes when it comes to dealing with the summer weather, whether it's high heat, high humidity, and paces change and efforts get harder despite, not putting in, feeling harder despite not putting in more effort. How do we handle that from a mental side of the sport?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is like that when we're focused a lot on our paces or on the how fast we think we should be running, right? Like we automatically will attach judgment to that. And so like with that then comes like this negative self-talk of like, oh, I can't believe I'm running this slow, like I should be running faster. So I really encourage athletes, instead of approaching things like through a judgmental lens, to come at it with like a curiosity. So like, okay, well, why am I running slower, right? And so that actually like triggers our brain then to like kind of problem solve. Oh, I'm running slower. Well, it's hot, right? Like, does heat impact me? Like, yes, it does. And so it helps our brain to kind of go down a different like reasoning pathway instead of just this judgment. And then the other athletes about is like asking yourself, like, why does it matter? Like, um, and so I think that's like where we start to get into like that nitty gritty, that oftentimes athletes have attached like some value and worth to like them performing a certain way. And so when they're not, instead of being able to accept it and to look at the context of it, they start to make a lot of judgments because it really is speaking to something like internal that they value.
So would you recommend then, as athletes, I mean, we know it's hot, right? We can open up our weather app or turn on the early morning news and we see that it's hot. You recommend that if they're using a training plan such as Training Peaks or something, even if it's on a notebook, to take note of that so that it kind of reinforces in their head that, yeah, I ran slower today than I did 3 months ago because of the heat?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like where it's good to focus more on like taking note of like our effort level. And so, like, oh, like my effort felt easy, right? And my effort felt moderate, and like not focusing so much on the pace. And then like being able to make a note, like if they necessarily like, oh, it's hot, right? Or, and like focusing on like, well, what other thoughts and feelings also came along with that, and trying to gather like data and think about like, well, also how did your body feel? Like, was it easy even though you were running slower? Was it easy and like it served the purpose that today was a recovery run or a recovery bike ride or whatever? And like, did it meet that purpose even if you were running slower? And if so, then like we achieved our goal. So like, why are we upset about it?
Yeah, I think one of the things you touched on was data, right? You're dealing with athletes at all levels, from high school to probably people my age who've been and or have been doing this stuff for about 15, 20 years. Um, Data gets to be really important for some people, but then it becomes overwhelming. How do you coach your athletes in dealing with this data once it starts to feel overwhelming for them?
Yeah, so I'm a fan of what I call the dumb watch, or what's known as the dumb watch. So I have like a smartwatch, but I've just kind of removed all the metrics. Like I know myself, so I've just removed, other than like my home screen has like distance and it has time because I'll alternate training between the two of them. And that's just kind of like what I do. And I don't like lap out my watch. Like I do different tricks. You know, if you can't like handle that, like you can really go buy a watch that is just like timing. And you know, like it might mean you don't go in and you check on like the data that is then like synced to Garmin or to Strava. Um, and really, once again, like learning how to maybe make more of like a mental training journal where instead of like we're writing down like, oh, I got this much BERT, I like did this many miles, I did this pace or whatever, or this amount of time, like we're really focused on like, okay, what was my intention for today? How was I feeling? Like, what were my thoughts? Like, did something go wrong that I could adjust or change like in a non-judgmental way? Like, what is the purpose of why I'm doing these things, and really trying to tune in more with our body, because our body is going to be our best cues and not necessarily our watch.
Yeah, and I took off my watch a handful of months ago because, with the Garmin today, right, it's calculating your stress score and all these data points. And in all honesty, it was causing me anxiety, right? I was like, oh my goodness, I'm too stressed out today, which was just adding to the stress of it all. And then it became stress score is so high, so I don't want to go run and make it even worse. So I just took it off. I took it off altogether and only wear it when I go swim, bike, and run at this point in time because it was just way too much for me. And, for those of you who are joining us and you're a beginner, you're going to get inundated with data. Use it to the best of your ability. Use it for what you need. Would you agree with that, Haleigh?
Yeah, yeah, and that's like where sometimes too, like, you know, sharing like your data with a coach or whatever can also be helpful, because then it's like, well, I don't need to necessarily look at my data because my coach is looking at it. And that's like that, like he can make a decision or they can make a decision for me, right? But it's also like knowing your own limits with data. Like if you find yourself, you know, obsessing over it, or being stressed out by it. Like I can't wear my watch to sleep because I don't get a lot of sleep now with a child. Like I would be so stressed out if I wore my watch to bed. It would tell me I never slept. So I just don't do it because it's not helpful.
It's amazing how, like, I also use a sleep cycle app to, gauge sleeping and stuff like that. And actually just last week, I was like, no more of this either. Like I turned the alarm off because then I started obsessing over the data that the sleep app was giving me. And it was just way too much for me. So we're trying to run a business here. That's enough stress. We're trying to train for events and that's enough stress. I don't need to be stressed out by a sleep app or by, my watch telling me what to do and what not to do.
Yeah. And I think the last point is like we're assuming like all that data is like correct when we know there's like actually large margins of error. And also like your body, even if that data is correct, it doesn't necessarily mean like that your body isn't capable of doing something, right? And so oftentimes when we're getting all of it and we're assuming it's correct, we can be putting like limits on ourselves. And sometimes it's helpful, but sometimes we can be putting limits on ourselves mentally that really aren't there physically because we're trusting this data and we're taking it as, are we good or are we not good?
So how do you work with an athlete to break that cycle? Like for me, it was easy to take my watch off just because I knew I was stressed out. It was easy for me to stop using the sleep cycle alarm because I knew it was stressing me out. But, we grow dependent on these devices. So how do you work with an athlete to kind of, is it slowly break? Is it cold turkey to get away from it?
Yeah, like we always talk first about just kind of like the function, like why are we attached to it? Like why are we using it? How do we think it's benefiting us? Because I don't think anything ever like lasts if we somebody just tells you like, oh, this is bad, like don't do it, or this is causing you stress. Like you've got to really understand like why you're using it and like why it's causing like the negative effects that it is, and even like what some of the positive like effects are. And then usually it is like starting small. So it might be like, okay, like let's maybe remove that for like an easy run. And like you can even go run like the route that you know is like 4 miles. Like just go do it without your watch. And so like where you start to eliminate, sometimes we'll start what's called what is it called? It's like called RPE. And so it's like response prevention exposure. And so what we'll do is like we'll make a list, and like from the bottom will be like the thing that causes the least amount of stress but still stressful. So that might be, okay, I won't do it on my easiest run of the week, and I'll do the loop that I know. And the highest amount of stress would be like, I'm not going to wear it like for my workout. I'm going to wear just a regular like Timex for my workout. And so we'll start and we'll just work on the lowest level stress until it doesn't cause us stress anymore. And then we'll kind of move up a list. And usually people have like 5 to 10 things that we kind of progressively go up on.
Very cool. Thanks to those of you who are just joining us. My name is Jason Bahamandi. I'm one of the co-owners of Run, Try, Bike, and today we're being joined by Haleigh Fisher of Trailhead DFW on our Fireside Chats, which we have every Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific, so put it on your calendar. Make sure you join us. Haleigh, we're on Instagram, and social media has become obviously so prevalent in our society. We use it for just about everything, and including athletes, right? So how has social media sort of impacted your business, where athletes have become, posting stories or whatever it might be on their feed about what they've been doing? Has it had a negative impact, positive impact, both? Can you expand on that a little bit for us?
I would say it's definitely both, though I definitely see it more negative. It like when people are talking to me about it, but like that also might be because the people talking to me about it is affecting them negatively, and they're in counseling because they're struggling, and so it could just be kind of like the people I'm talking with. But I think it's just really raised a lot of like comparison, right? And so I can feel really good about like what I did, and then like 10 minutes later I can look on Strava and see like, oh, everybody ran faster and further than me today. And like, or you can go look online and see who's going to be racing against you, and you can see all their results. And just creates this, it can create this comparison that doesn't allow us to focus on like, okay, what do I need? Like what training benefits me the most? And me being confident in that, right? Because we all need different training. And what we really need most is to do that training and believe in it and to be confident in it. And that's what's going to lead to success, not necessarily comparing like what somebody else is doing to what I'm doing.
So could that not also trip us over into another, perfectionism, excuse me, where we're not comparing ourselves, but now we're so focused on our own training plan that we have to make sure that if it says run 4 miles, that I run exactly 4 miles, whether I feel good or not. So is there a correlation between the two? Is there an opportunity to then all of a sudden have that impact us on a stress level?
Yeah, I think too, there is like sometimes, where the perfectionism comes up because you're worried about executing your training perfectly because it's out there, right? Like if you're posting it, like it's out there. And so it becomes less about maybe sometimes listening to our body and doing what we need to do, and more almost that idea of like perfectionism or performance of like, I want to make sure everybody knows, and like I'm secure in like that I'm doing the training, right? I don't want people to think like, oh, she's not doing the training now, or they're not doing the training now.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I find interesting with the social media adaptation to training for these events is your point, which is I ran 4 miles today and I'm posting it on Strava, and it's supposed to be an easy run, and sometimes the heart rate is in like zone 5, and it's just because they want to show that performance on their Strava account, and that can impact their training, which would then lead potentially to injury. So
Right.
how do you roll all of this back as a counselor? Like it just seemed for me, just talking to you, it seems like it can be overwhelming.
Yeah, and like that's where it gets back to, which is like the most simple, basic question, which is all of counseling, which is like, what's the root of this? Like, where is this coming from? Like, what values, what beliefs, like, are driving these things? Because, like, oftentimes it's easy to focus like on behaviors or even like um, negative like symptoms, like, oh, I'm feeling more anxious, right? And like anxiety isn't necessarily like the issue. And that's what sometimes people want to fix, right? And so they're like, oh, well, I'm anxious, so I'll delete my Strava or I'll put it on private or whatever, right? But they never fix the underlying issue of like, well, why is that making you anxious? And so we know then that they usually, if you don't fix the underlying issue, you just move it to something else. So now they're not on Strava, but now they're on TikTok, right? Or now they're like racing people at group runs, right? Like, and so it really comes down to like us like really unpacking, okay, well, what's going on here? Like, why are you doing this? Like, what are the feelings that are coming up, right? And they're not, I think sometimes people think like emotions happen like in a vacuum in sport, but like usually if you're anxious about like your Strava, you usually have anxiety about what people think of you in other areas of your life too. Like
Yep.
it's not usually just one thing, right?
Right. But I think you use the word why a number of times. And so for those of you who have been to our website, you know that Haleigh wrote an article about understanding your why. Tell us why it's important to know your why.
Yeah. Well, our motives are definitely like what drive us, right? And those motives, for some people, like whether it's for sport or just in life in general, like making a decision of like where do I want to live, like what do I want to have for lunch today, right? Like for a lot of people, motives just come naturally, right? And they just do the thing without actually thinking about it. And that's not inherently bad. Like we can't always think about exactly why we're doing all the things we're doing, but we've all have a beliefs and events and personalities that have shaped like our motivations. And so understanding why we're doing the things we're doing helps to inform us um, because our emotions won't always line up with the things that we want to do or the things that we don't want to do, right? And so understanding then like what's actually more about our values as people then becomes a greater driving force because that's a lot more stable than my emotions. And
Right.
so I always tell people the example is I'm like, man, like you could ask me a question at like 6 a.m. and I would be like totally happy to answer it because I really am a morning person. And then you could ask me the same question at 10 p.m. and I'd be like super annoyed about anything anybody's asking me at 10 p.m. And I'm like, because emotions are so up and down and individual, right? And so like my motivation then for answering somebody's question can't necessarily be made based on my emotions. Same thing when it goes to training. There's going to be days I don't want to get up and go and do this. And then I'm going to have a very up and down like relationship with training because it's going to be based on my feelings, which are influenced by so many different things.
Yeah. So then is it difficult? Do you see it being difficult for the people that you work with? I guess in compartmentalizing that, right? Where training is up and down and then it affects them. Do you find that the people you're working with find that it's difficult to compartmentalize and move training to the side? Because at the end of the day, this is a hobby for most of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're typically not getting paid. We're actually making payments to participate in these events. And so, like any other hobby, you might just quit one day because, you've had enough of it. So do you find it hard for athletes that you're working with to compartmentalize this whole idea of endurance sports and performance and because we're all most likely type A, right?
Mm-hmm. Uh, yes and no. I think a lot of them it is very hard to compartmentalize, right? I think that also it's very um, easy to be very driven by like success and like fun and like emotional experiences. And so, it really then gets back down to like, okay, well, like let's talk about then your long-term goals. Like, is your long-term goal to just have as much fun as you can right now and to be done, whenever like you're not having fun anymore? Or is your long-term goal like to be doing this, 10, 15 years down the line, your whole life, whatever it is? And like really kind of helping them to pull back and start to assess like, well, what do I really want? And how do I put that in the bigger context of my life, right? Because like you're saying, most people are not professionals. And so like how, if I want this to be a part of my life, like how do I then put it in the context of my life and also have flexibility with it?
Yeah. Yeah. So how? How do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's so individualized, right? Like it very much comes down to, okay, like, you know, can we then see a bigger picture? Because I think what happens is people get stuck very much in the moment, right? They're not looking like, okay, so like example is like postpartum, right? So I've done most of my runs the past year, like pushing my stroller, right? And that's not, and there's benefits to that, but it's like not necessarily like the training that I want to be doing. But I'm also like, well, there are trade-offs because of sleep, right? That I'm not going to miss sleep because I don't think that would help me long term. And if I want to reach my goals that I have for myself in like 5 years, then I need to look at this year not as I need to go be the best that I can be and be super hardcore. I need to look at this year with grace in context of my bigger goals.
That's a great point, right? So if we're looking to do this long term, I've been involved in these sports for 14, 15 years now. And um, I see these images of folks in their 70s and 80s, and that inspires me. Like, I want to do that down the road. And so I have to take into account that that's the long term goal versus, sacrificing. So I have to sacrifice something today for the long term goal. When you're working with athletes, are you working with them on short term and, I guess medium term and long term goals so that they're staying the course, for lack of a better phrase?
Yeah, that's something like we're always talking about. I probably almost ask it every single time that I see an athlete is I just check in because I know people change their goals a lot. And so I just check in about like, hey, what is still our short-term goal? Like what's still the reason like why we're doing this? Has this changed at all? Like what's our like medium goal? What's our long-term goal? Okay, like are the choices we're making this week, are they aligning like with them? Like with our values of like why we're even participating and then our goals of what we want to achieve. And if they're not, like what's going on that they're not doing it, right? And most of the time it's just like I would say it's almost always like people aren't doing it almost always out of anxiety and like fear of missing out, fear of like if I'm not running this race this weekend, then I don't have as much value as other like as I want to have, or I feel like I have when I run races and people like congratulate me, right? Like there's usually something going on there, like fear driven, that's not allowing them to actually be in line with their goals and their values.
Yeah, you just mentioned something and it reminded me. When I first started racing Ironman events, right? You get all the slaps on the back and the kudos and congratulations, and then honestly, 7 days later they're gone because there's another race the following weekend. And in my head, I've learned to deal with the idea that it's not the external motivation that's going to get me across the finish line. It's the internal motivation. But when you have somebody, especially because you're dealing with high school athletes too, in some cases,
Yeah.
where external pressure's got to be tremendous. How do you help them develop some sort of coping tips and mechanisms to deal with that external pressure and focus on the internal motivation and inspiration to do what they're doing?
Yeah. So I mean, I think first is like talking about how like external pressure isn't necessarily like bad, or external motivation isn't bad. Like we all like have some degree of external motivation, but then we also talk about like is that external pressure and motivation, like what are the negative effects that are happening, and then like are there ways that we can limit that, right? And so it might mean like, oh, I'm not going to go on message boards that I know people are talking about me, right? Like i might um I might ask a coach or a friend, you know, to uh, to change the way they talk to me. And I don't necessarily mean like they're saying something bad, but telling them like, hey, like when you tell me like, oh, you can go, you can might be professional in this, right? Like that it puts a lot of pressure on me. And so I might ask them to not say those things to me and instead like say something like that is actually helpful. Like you're such a hard worker. Like you have such great like skill handling the ball, right? Like, or whatever it is that you're doing, and so that you're actually getting then feedback that's helpful for you and not necessarily things that are unhelpful like externally.
That makes total sense. So, for those of you who are just joining us, my name is Jason Bahamundi. I'm one of the owners of the Run, Try, Bike multimedia platform. We're being joined today on our Tuesday Fireside Chats by Haleigh Fisher of Trailhead DFW, formerly Grapevine Wellness Center. And we're talking about, the mental aspect of endurance sports. And so one of the things that Haleigh did for us when we first started this business almost 18 months ago was not just write an article about understanding your why, but she recently wrote, I shouldn't say recently, but she did write an article as well about taper crazies. And for those of you who are joining us and understand that Western States is this coming weekend, which is a huge event in the trail running world, they have to manage their taper crazies. Haleigh, what advice can you give to our audience on this topic? Maybe those people that are in Western States are already there and they've already dealing with it, but there's going to be another race the following weekend. And how do you handle the taper crazies at this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that somebody can do is like about the mental game of like confidence and like their training, right? And so it really is like for some people like recalling like workouts and things they did that give them confidence that their training is has prepared them adequately for the race they're doing, right? And so it's like taking, I would say, only like 5 to 10 minutes each day leading up to it to think about that, and on the day of, not like maybe spend like 1 minute like thinking about it. But you really want to set like a time limit because our brains like to like dwell, and they like to write other narratives. And so really only trying to dedicate like 5 or 10 minutes to thinking about like the confidence you have in your training. And then the rest of it would be, like managing, I think, that kind of like stress or anxiety. And so like doing things that are relaxing for you. So, reading a book, like taking a bath, doing whatever, and not doing I want to say crazy things, but the wild things like that your brain comes up with that it's like, oh yeah, like we've never, ever, ever done this in our entire life, but we should definitely go hike for like 3 hours today just to make sure, because we're not running. And so we need to go do that just to make sure like you're good. Like otherwise your legs are going to feel terrible. And like you can just make up things that are not helpful that you've never done. So don't do things you've never done before. Don't try to make up for your training. Really like lean on your support system. And so like when you have those doubts that are creeping in, instead of allowing them to just like be in your head, talk to people like your coach, your friends, people you trust, tell them about your anxieties, your worries, and allow them to, remind you like, hey, like you've done the work, like it's just time to have fun, right? Like it's just time to experience like what you put on all the effort for. And then really like just focusing, I think, on things like that you can control and not on things you can't control. So like don't be checking the weather all the time. Don't be like worrying about what other people are going to do or how their training was. Like focus on like, okay, like I can get to bed early, even if I can't sleep, right? Even if I have anxiety, I can still go rest. I can make sure I'm eating enough and not like think, oh, this is the time to try new things with foods and I can make sure I have all my gear packed. I can make sure I understand where I'm going. And so focusing on those things can help with our anxiety because they do bring a sense of control, and that's not bad to like want control, but not focusing on things like we can't control, like that don't like they just cause worry when you can't control them, right? Because you try to control them.
Absolutely. So you mentioned coach. So when I have athletes during their race week, every day, whether they're using Training Peaks or we're in Google Docs or whatever, it says every day, ass down, feet up. Like that's everything that they need to know for the whole week. Like don't try to go out there, to your point, and do a 3-hour hike or, let me try to squeeze in this last 20-minute run. It's too late. We've been building to this point and we need to make sure we do that. So that's one of the things I do as a coach. Another thing I do as a coach is I remind them like all the hard work has already been done. This is now the time to celebrate all your hard work. Race day shouldn't cause anxiety, right? You know your goal, you know what you've done to that point to get to that goal, but that doesn't mean that we always listen to ourselves going into the race. So, and I wonder if there are opportunities to have tips or cues for ourselves. We're in the midst of a race and we feel like we're underperforming to our goal. How do we reset in the race that we are currently in?
Yeah. So during the race, it's really good. I like for people to have A, B, and C goals, right? And so you can make your A goal whatever you want. A lot of times people make their A goal very I would say very like externally like focused, right? So like they make it very much like, okay, well, I'm going to race this time or place in this amount, like up in the top 10 or whatever, right? Like it's very, I would say a lot of times like numbers or data driven. And so if that's your A goal, like that's fine, right? But being able to adjust to have a B and a C goal, if you don't like to call them B and C goals, you can call them whatever else you want to. Like my college coach used to say, we don't have a plan B, we just have plan A that we change, right?
That's cool. I love it.
Right? So you can have two changes or however many changes you need to plan eight, but you need to have them going in before you get there because it can be very hard to come up with them in the moment. So if I notice like, okay, I'm not going to make the time that I thought I was going to, right? Like not through the checkpoint and like anywhere close. I'm just my body doesn't feel well. Like, okay, so my next goal could be like, okay, well, I'm really going to focus on hydration and nutrition for the rest of the race. Like I'm gonna let go of that A goal, that first goal, and I'm just gonna focus on these two things and see what happens, right? Because oftentimes, like if you are able to adjust and you're not able to get down on yourself, sometimes when you adjust the goal, you come really close to your first goal
Oh,
because you've let go of it.
right.
And like with letting go of it and having a different goal that you're working to, some people will still come very, very close because they put in the work for that A goal, right? And so depending on just like what kind of day like their body like is having or responds to. And so then if that goal is not working right, like then we can have another one. And usually like the third goal, I usually try to make it more about more like internally like focused. So it might be like, okay, well, I'm going to have a positive attitude, right? Or I'm going to um, I'm really going to focus on encouraging the other people that I see around me or whatever it is. And so that way, like, even if, you know, like you're vomiting, you're like off tap, like off time, like so much, right? Like there's still something like that you can seek that like really the factors of their race aren't able to take from you because like they're internally driven.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I find for me when races aren't going as I thought they would is just thanking the volunteers because
Mm-hmm.
they return such positive energy 99% of the time that that helps give you a boost to keep going and get close to your A goal. I know earlier this year I was racing out here in Arizona, and it dawned on me that I was comparing myself to 40-year-old Jason when I'm 48 years old now, right? And I had to reassess in the middle of the race, like, dude, you're 48. You're not 40 anymore. Like that person doesn't exist in a way. And so just being able to reassess that way. And sure enough, like the race got, I won't say easier, but because I was able to have that mind shift, to your point, I found myself getting better as the race went on because I was no longer comparing myself to the person that I was 8 years ago. Um, and so I think you make a good point where, you know, we just shift our plan A over the course of the race. So for those of you who are just getting started in these sports, just understand that you have the ability to change your plan A as many times as Haleigh's old coach used to refer to it as. So
Yeah.
we appreciate that advice and thought process. So you're a new mom. Your child is about 14, 15 months old now. Um, for moms who are either in the process, you know, they're pregnant today or like you just recently had the baby, any tips in coping with, like I just said, the person that you used to be, you know, prior to getting pregnant and dealing with that from an athlete level?
Yeah, I mean, I think one is like understanding like that maybe some of the things like you could do, like you just don't have the time, you don't have the energy to do now. And instead of being mad and feeling like, I think because what can happen is like we compare to that person and we try to make it happen, right? So like if I used to do this, then I'm gonna make it happen. And like I see a lot of people like that leads them to burning out, that leads them to like maybe not doing it at all because they can't do it to that extent or that perfectly. It can lead to fights like with their partners, like it can lead to all of these things. And so like really adjusting like expectations and putting it in the context of like once again long-term goals, right? And what am I capable of right now? And like, what are my priorities right now? And so kind of like I was saying earlier, like my priority was to race this year, but it wasn't necessarily to have like the race that I planned for in 5 years, right? Like, because I knew that's not going to happen. Like I could try to do that and I might make that goal, but I could also, the likelihood of me getting injured was like super high. Like also the likelihood of then like, what am I going to do in 5 years? Like I'm not here just to like check off little boxes, right? Like, um, and be done like this year. And so really for me, like I had to adjust like my expectations and look at a bigger picture and be able to then also like take note of like being proud of like what I did, right? Like and
Right.
what I've done. And so being like, yeah, you know what? It's freaking hard to run with a stroller. Like it's like you're pretty much like pushing around 50 pounds all the time, right? Like and I live in a hilly neighborhood. And so I'm like, yeah, maybe I'm not running like the mileage or like the pace that I used to, but I'm freaking pushing my child around, right? And also like it gets back to once again like the why and the values, right? And it was like, well, I didn't want to miss sleep because I knew like I'm just not going to function. Like I can't function as a counselor, I can't function as a mom, a
Right.
partner, a friend. Like I'm not a pleasant person to be around. And so I can't do that in order to run where it's just going to put me in a bad place.
Right.
And then also, you know, it was fun to get to run with my son. Like that's something that I'm only gonna get to do, you know, this time for sure, but like, you know, maybe another time, who knows? And so being able to embrace that time, like he's not gonna want to run with me forever.
So I totally get it. Honestly, pushing a 50-pound stroller up hills just means you're going to get stronger when you finally stop running with the stroller, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Whenever I run without it, I'm like, oh wow, running is so easy.
That might be something I put into a training plan is have somebody get a stroller and put a cinder block in it and start pushing that around. And that'll
Yeah.
get, because we as athletes, right, whereas as runners and endurance athletes in general, we tend to not want to do the strength training pieces of all of this stuff. Well, here's a
Mhm.
strength training without actually going to a gym kind of idea.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I was very impressed with I only ran one race this past year and when I ran it I was like, "Oh wow, that turned out better than I expected," even though I was kind of like iffy because I was like, "Well, I didn't like train as much as I like thought I was going to." And then I was like, "Oh, that turned out fine. I guess like that stroller running like was okay."
There's no doubt that it helped. Zero
Yeah.
doubt. I live in an area now here in Phoenix that has tons of mountains. And
Mm.
so paces are much slower than when I lived in Dallas because it's a lot hillier and flatter. But when I do run on flat courses, I am faster than I was when I lived in Dallas, even though my paces here are slow. So from a mental aspect, right, that adjustment had to be made. Like you're now climbing 100 foot a mile versus 30 or 40 foot a mile, and that makes a big difference in the long run.
Yeah, and I think that's like such a good point, like just for so many things with athletics, right? Is that we like to compare ourselves or like ourselves to other people or to ourselves like our best self or whatever, right? And like context is everything.
Yeah,
And oftentimes like comparison usually doesn't have any context, right? Like it's just comparing my best race ever to like today. And it's like, well, okay, well, what if like the best race you ever had, like you know, it was at the perfect weather and today is like boiling and you were in a field of people that were actually competitive, right? Like that you were competing against that could push you. And like today there's nobody around you. Like there's so many things to like think about like context, like when we are making comparisons.
yeah. And so my advice to those of you who are just getting started is take notes of all of it. Like understand what is happening in that particular day. It may not mean much to you in that moment, but maybe 3 to 6 months down the road when you're doing another training run in that same exact area, it might be better, it might be worse, but you can reflect back and be like, oh yeah, it was super hot that day. I didn't sleep enough, as you pointed out. Who knows what may have happened? Something at work caused you anxiety and stress. You may be running at a different time of the day. So just keep good notes of your training in your journals and stuff like that, because you will be able to reflect back on it. And that's one of the things we see a lot of elite athletes do. And it's something that beginner athletes can definitely apply. We're coming up on 5:40, so I don't want to keep everybody here too long. So one of the things that we like to do at the end is we have these serious discussions. We ask questions. We get lots of great tips from folks like Haleigh. Is we like to have a rapid fire session. and we want to make people laugh and have an enjoyable time now. So Haleigh, are you ready for our rapid fire session?
I'm ready.
Awesome. So when you're out running, whether you're pushing the stroller or not, do you listen to music, podcasts, or nature?
If I'm pushing the stroller, podcast. Otherwise, nothing.
No. Footfalls, nature, and wind, right?
Yeah. Nature,
Awesome.
yeah.
Favorite podcast?
Ooh, usually I'm listening to like a sermon from a church.
Very nice, very nice. So this is the controversial topic we're going to discuss today, which is pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, we're going
Oh my gosh.
this.
There's a place in Grapevine that puts pineapple on their pizza and it's also spicy and has like a honey spicy sauce on it. It's really good.
No, it's pineapple on it. It can't be that good. So in that case, if you're putting pineapple on pizza, then you like New York style pizza versus Chicago style pizza?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
What about Detroit? Detroit style pizza?
Ooh, I've never had Detroit style
Oh,
pizza.
I'm a New York guy. I refuse to eat Chicago, but I will eat Detroit. And the way they make it is they put cheese up around the edges, and it's sort of like almost like a Sicilian type style, but it's cheese up around the outside, and it still has like that crunch and stuff to it. So if you can find a Detroit style pizza joint, go to it because it's really good. And that's coming from a New Yorker, by the way. Candy corn, is it a real candy or not?
Oh, it's gross.
Yeah.
But no, candy is delicious.
You have redeemed yourself. You're back in the Peeps. Is that a real candy?
No.
Yes. All right. 2 out of 3. We're back on board. Where would you rather be, the mountains or the beach?
The mountain.
Beautiful. Bucket list event. What's the one thing that you want to do? It doesn't have to be endurance sports related.
Ooh, I think I just want to run a mountain race. I don't really care where.
There you go. Favorite book?
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Very nice. Classic. And your favorite movie?
Ooh, I don't watch a lot of movies. Let me think. I don't watch a lot of movies and I don't listen to a lot of music. So, yeah.
With what you do, I'm sure there's a lot of reading involved.
Yeah. I don't know what my favorite movie would be. Maybe.
What about the most recent movie you've seen?
I don't know.
Streaming.
Sorry, what?
What streaming TV show?
Oh, well, we watched Stranger Things recently.
Stranger Things. Have you seen the Inventing Anna show on Netflix?
Oh, I did watch that, yes.
So we want to talk about like mental components of life. Like, I just watching that series and I still scratch my head about the delusionment of it all. But I mean, amazing.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for joining us, Haleigh. Really appreciate your time. By the way, folks, if you go to runtrimag.com, click on the tab at the top that says articles. The drop down will take you to sports psychology. We have got a boatload of articles from Haleigh that she has written for us over the past almost 2 years there, as well as in our magazine. We will have a digital version of our magazine coming out on July 15th. So sign up for our newsletter at runtrimag.com right at the top. You can get it, or if you scroll down to the bottom, subscribe to our newsletter. Haleigh, as always, thank you very much for everything that you do for Run, Try, Bike. We love having you participate with us in this chat and writing for us in our website and article. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you too.
By the way, where can people find you besides here on Instagram?
Yeah, they can find me at my website, which is trailheadcounseling.com. And there they can email me or call me. My phone number is on there too, so or text me. So that's awesome. The way to reach me.
Thank you very much. By the way, people, join us next week, Tuesday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. And this episode will be on our Instagram feed here in a few moments, but it will also be on our YouTube channel and our website by the end of the week. All of our Fireside Chats are across the top on our menu as well. Click on that and you'll see this is our 11th episode, so you'll see them all there. And this one will be up on our website by the end of the week as well. Haleigh, thank you again very much. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.